got nominated this morning. So, you guys, please bear with me. It's really important lesson today. And the key verse is, let those who love the Lord hate evil, for he guards the lives of his faithful ones and delivers them from the hands of the wicked. From Psalms 97:10. And this is back into Esther. All right, I think you guys have been talking about Esther. So the story of Esther illustrates for us the stark contraction between a life between selfish purposes and a life lived by God's commands. This is something that I always, when Greg gets back, you can ask him what I say about stuff like that. And we're going to go back and we're talking about Haman. Haman was what we would call today a power player. We're familiar with those, right? He's so ambitious that he would use any means to advance himself. There is no mention of him in the first two chapters. Then we see him in Esther 3:1. We suddenly see him promoted to become the king's right-hand man. Who knows what role he had to play in those schemes to get to where he was, right? That powerful position. The best thing that we can say about King Xerxes is that he delegated authority so completely to this Haman that he was not paying close attention to everything that was going on around him. If the king had been paying attention, he would have been recalled. He had recalled that a Jew had just saved him from an assassination plot. But he gave Haman complete authority, and apparently he didn't listen. He didn't even listen to his plan for extermination of the Jews. If he was actually listening, he may have even rationalized that in a totalitarian state in which the king had absolute authority, any group whose laws convene the king's laws cannot be permitted to continue. So we see two kinds of evil in these two men. Haman, he's aggressively evil in his ambition for greed. King Xerxes, he was passionately evil in disregarding and lack of concern for others. Both men abused power and entrusted to them. Today, we're going to look at these forms of evil and then at another lifestyle option. And this is all suggested by God's Word. So, Haman, he's a villain, right? So, he enters the story as the villain. And it doesn't say why the king chose to honor Haman in this position. We have no idea. Ironically, the last verses that were recorded, how Mordecai performed a deed that was not rewarded. So he just saved his life and he's not rewarded. In contrast, the authors in this Esther did not describe what Haman had done, but it shows him being honored before all others. So just put yourself in that position. You just helped someone save their life, and you didn't get rewarded, and we don't know where this other guy's coming from, but he's getting all the power and glory, right? So let's go back into another detail. All right, so Haman's entering this story, and his ancestry is not really, it's noted. He's an Agagite. If we go back into the descendants, they were enemies of God. Agag, he was from the line of Amalite. The Amalekites had been Israel's enemies for centuries, going back to the same time when the Amalekites attacked the nation of Israel while its people were traveling between Egypt and the Promised Land. So it's like, it's a prophecy that the Lord would be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation. King Saul had an aspect with this. He fought against the Amalekites, but he didn't destroy all the people. So we're about to see how Amon sought his revenge against the people who had devastated his own nation. So this is very important. So beware the evils in ambition and power brooding. Esther 3, 1 through 2. After these things did King help me, I said it this morning. Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence him. So all the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to this Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. Haman had such a high ranking in the country of Persia, and it included the province which stretched from India to Kush, or its upper regions into the Nile River. So we need to understand that all of the known world at this time, Persia had conquered all of its enemies for thousands of miles and ruled over them. So this king was only one more power, and Haman seemed to have the ability to manipulate the king into doing whatever he thought best. So in effect, Haman, like Joseph in Egypt, ruled the world. Unlike Joseph, though,
Haman ruled for himself.
Yeah, he did. He eliminated whoever got in his way or offended his pride. Knowing the whole scope of Haman's power made Esther more understandable. Who would bow to a man who ruled the world? So Mordecai, in Haman's mind, he was a mere slave. He refused to bow down to him. Haman's pride was aroused. He became not only angry, but murderous. Even in his state of this rage, his pride kept him in check. He didn't want to be seen as being angry to a mere slave who wouldn't bow down to him. It bothered him, though, and he plotted a way to get rid of Mordecai without his revenge being obvious to others. We could possibly see that today. To get rid of one man, he was going to kill an entire population of slaves. So he clearly had no concern for the value of human life. Haman's pride and power were a lethal combination, often seen in the evil perpetuated by rulers with no accountability to a higher power. Haman was more concerned about his reputation than for the lives of power of thousands of people. How did one become evil in this way? It's easy. Just spend a lifetime of making small choices to think more of yourself than others. Choose the biggest piece for yourself. Abuse boundaries where you have any power. What Haman did was completely normal for human beings without God. But what about those who know God and still place their power and reputation before the good of others? So, question for you guys. Why do you think that people get so carried away with this desire for power? Why?
Sometimes we just like attention.
Yeah. But what about feel good? Does power make you feel good? Yeah. And people who do not know that they are loved by God, don't they need some way of assurance? That's in self-esteem. So why does God allow people to hurt others? Any idea? He's given us a free will, right? He cannot interfere in evil actions without revoking his gift of that free will to choose between that evil and good. So, Haman, his evil was of greed, obsessive, and limitless, powerful type. But as powerful as Haman was, he had not reckoned with the greater power of good. God's power is triumphant because it is good, unattainted by greed or selfishness. But before we focus on good, we need to look at passive evil. The fallen nature is neither passively evil or promoting self-interest. This is really important, guys. And Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of the kingdom, and their laws are dispersed from all people. Neither keep the king's laws, therefore it is not the king's profit to suffer them. Which isn't true. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business to bring it into the king's treasury. He's got a lot of money there, right? And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it into Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the Jews' enemies. And the king said unto Haman, the silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to thee. So, Haman had King Xerxes wrapped around his little finger. And by the way, King Xerxes is the same thing as the name that I'm having a hard time with. It seems like, because I looked that up, Alright, so Haman convinced the king to destroy a huge group of men, women, and children. And he didn't identify the people's group that he hoped to eliminate. Question for you. That he wanted to say 10,000 talents of silver. That's an immense amount of money during that time. So, could Haman have been wealthy? If so, was he going to be willing enough to give up that amount of money to see the Jews destroyed? Perhaps the Jews together had possessions worth of at least part of this great amount. If so, it could have been confiscated as the Jews were destroyed. Then we think about the signet ring. It contained a lot of power. And he was giving it all to Haman. So he expressed his trust in Haman to do what was best for the kingdom. That's important. The king of 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia was arguably the most powerful man in the world, but he had delegated tremendous authority to Haman. By doing so, King Xerxes passively participated in Haman's evil plans. Haman's sins were those of commission, and the king illustrated sins of omission. He did nothing to stop that evil happening, and thus was caused for evil action. Several times in this book of Esther, people approached the king with if it pleased the king, and laid out their schemes. King Xerxes was so concerned with pleasing himself that he seemingly never gave thought to anyone else. While this is somewhat typical of kings throughout history, Xerxes was negligent in his duties when he failed to note the evil that was being planned by his officials in the king's name. In chapter 2, he allowed for officials to enact the kidnapping of beautiful young women for the new king's contest, or new queen's contest. He gave Haman permission to exterminate the Jews. Twice he promised Esther anything she wanted, up to half of his kingdom. Did he really think things through and what it meant? He had gave permission to Haman to plan to kill the Jews. This pattern of Xerxes' leadership up to this point was to let his subordinates carry out whatever that they thought was best. The king was evil by his passive consent to the wickedness, perpetuated under his royal signature. One has a right to wonder if he ever read the documents upon which he placed his signet ring approval. So, for us not to stop evil, whether participating in it either actively or passively, John Wesley reminds us that that is sin a mission. In every bit, it's as sinful as deliberately acts of sin. That's something to really think about, if we allow it to go on and not do anything about it. King Xerxes was weak, and he was a foolish man who let other people manipulate him. So, what kind of examples do we commonly see now in this world that we live in? Any examples? What about, they say a lot of people are hungry. We've talked about this. You can drive by the road, and then that's something that we have to let God talk about. Those people that are over there that they say hunger. But one example of this would be Christians who don't work against hunger. Poverty and obsession are guilty or agreeing with evil. So if we think something's evil, we need to stand up for that. Another question it says is, can we think of times when we have been tempted to remain silent rather than take a stand against evil? And if so, how do we decide what course of action that we take? It calls for a personal response. We don't want evil to go on, correct?
That's maybe an example. You may see you have someone being mistreated at work, and some things going on shouldn't go, but you don't speak up because you think your own job might be in jeopardy if you try to defend or try to lift up the Lord. If your company, the leaders in the company don't happen to be Christian, and so they sort of promote all these other things other than try to give God praise.
Yeah.
And you could be that voice that could turn people's heads, but you don't want to stand out and put your head on the chopping block.
That is true. Anybody got any other way? Any ideas? God speaks strongly against evil passive evil in his words and obsession communicated through the prophets. So this oppression can arise from either neglect, just as easily from the deliberate aggression. So something for you to think about is, what does God's word require of us in the face of evil? So good triumphs over evil when God is honored. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not yet showed her kindred for her people, as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like when she was brought up with him. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlain, Bithan and Tersha, of those which kept the doors, were wroth, and they sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, and he told it unto Esther the queen. And Esther certified the king, therefore, of Mordecai's name. So we're going back in time before this actually happened. This is the assassination that was taking place. And when the inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out, therefore they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. Then the king's servant, which were in the king's gate, said unto Mordecai, Why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Now it came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath. And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had shewed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. So, evidently, from his position of honor, Haman had not discovered that Mordecai was a Jew. I had only discovered that Mordecai was a Jew, but he had asked the other officials to keep an eye on Mordecai, because he seemingly wanted any excuse to humble this man from the nation that he despised. So Haman saw that Mordecai wasn't going to bow down, and this enraged him. Anger, right? We see anger taking place. It's hard to believe that Haman had never noticed Mordecai standing while everyone else knelt. So, think about this. Mordecai was asked to bow down. He had several options opened up with him whenever Haman's pride threatened his life. He could have buckled and bowed to Haman. We can do that today. We could have fled. He could have fled. We could put ourselves in that. Gone by the king and risked his life trying to explain. Bargained with God to rescue him. Or he could even try to kill Haman. Mordecai, being such a godly character, he didn't try to escape the situation. Instead, he tried to face it squarely, and he stood his ground. Honoring God was more important than anything Haman could threaten. Mordecai had already done the king a huge favor in sparing him from an assassination attempt. Since the king had not shown gratitude to Mordecai, and Haman was angry that Mordecai refused to bow, Mordecai chose to fight rather than acquiesce. He advised Esther to do the same. She, like Mordecai, agreed to enter the king's presence at the risk of losing her life and fight evil head on. Notice that Mordecai did not go looking for evil. He didn't even defy the king or Haman until they made choices of honoring God and honoring Haman. Then he had no choice but to honor God. This was his choice that put his life in danger. Kind of like what you were talking about, right? Puts your life in danger. Yet not even the fear of losing his life was important to Mordecai for bowing to no one but Jehovah, his God. So he fasted, prayed, and he took action against the evil by choosing simply being himself. Good triumphs over evil because God chooses that it should. And he still does that today. So, is Mordecai's goodness passive or active in this instant? He was active, right? So, how can we, each one of us, being full of God's goodness, triumph over evil? God's written them in a book we call the Bible.
Yeah. Be that voice. Stand up for what's right.
Stand up for truth. So evil still runs rampant today. How will we as Christians respond? Will we ignore it, hoping it'll go away? Will we go looking for dragons to slay? Will we live lives of goodness, that we will constantly be shedding God's salt and light on people all around us? What situations in your life right now calls for a response to evil? What will you choose to do? And does anyone want to say anything that they get out of this?
Sort of what it reminded me of, we went to Durham yesterday. Jeffrey had to take a test, and afterwards we went to downtown. And I'd not seen a street preacher in a long time. You know, and it had this man there with the megaphone thing, had a sign up and holding up, you know, wasn't really being really aggressive or spoken, didn't have it. He might have one person, maybe his wife, that was there, you know, as his audience. And but he was out there to shed the word, you know, and speak up, and sort of goes along with what this lesson reminded me of. And but it sort of shows that so somebody, even when you're standing alone, you know, me passing by, I recognized it. You know, so somebody's going to recognize it and get a word from it, even when you don't think they are.
Yep. They do that at state too. We've been up there and they had pastors that were out there just preaching. So good. Well, let's take this lesson and use what God tells us to do to fight evil. Good always wins.